Today's episode is sponsored by Stitch Squad. If you know a crafty tween, check out Stitch Squad, a brand new subscription box all about fiber crafts and cuteness. Each monthly box highlights a different fiber craft technique with a focus on learning new skills. With supplies to complete 2 to 3 projects, plus a bundle of adorable notions, craft tools, and crafty surprises, it's a cute, colorful, crafty unboxing experience. All you have to do is open the box and enjoy. Gift subscriptions are available. To subscribe, visit stitchsquadbox.com and use the code ALLIANCE for 20% off your first box. Thank you so much, Stitch Squad. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 272 of the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals where you can strengthen your creative business, stay up to date on industry news, and build connections within our supportive trade association. Check it out at craftindustryalliance.org. Today on the show, we're talking about documentary filmmaking with my guest, Jenifer McShane. Jenifer is an independent filmmaker committed to using film to bridge understanding in situations where structural or cultural divisions typically keep people apart. Jenifer's current film, The Quilters, a documentary short about a quilting group in a men's prison in Missouri, recently premiered at the DC Dox Film Festival in Washington, D.C., and will be traveling to other film festivals this summer. Her previous film, Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops, won an Emmy for Outstanding Editing and the Jury Award at South by Southwest. It's currently streaming on HBO. Jenifer spent over 4 years visiting Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in Bedford, New York, to make her previous documentary, Mothers of Bedford, which reveals the impact of incarceration on mothers and their children. Her first documentary, which she co-directed, A Leap of Faith, was narrated by Liam Neeson and premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Jenifer was born and raised in New York City and currently lives in Guilford, Connecticut. Jenifer McShane, welcome.
Thank you, Abby, so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you were able to do this because as soon as I saw the trailer for your most recent short, The Quilters, I completely in love with it. I think it's so important. And I can't wait to actually see the full, I think it's about 30-minute documentary. Yep. So we're going to get to how you came to make this film and why it's so important. But I'd love to start a little bit with your background because I've actually never spoken to somebody who's a documentary filmmaker. So I'm sort of fascinated as to how you came to this as a career choice. So tell us a little bit about your sort of growing up and education.
Okay. I grew up in New York City and never thought I would make documentary films. It just wasn't on my radar. I've always loved movies and I've always loved films, but I was a poli-sci major and I have had other jobs. I worked in the election unit at CBS News for years and enjoyed it immensely. And I've also worked in the nonprofit world for charitable organizations doing peace and reconciliation work. And actually, while I was working, I came across the Irish story that you mentioned, A Leap of Faith, and ended up working on that with another female filmmaker and just kind of fell in love with the art of it. I was interested in the topic. I had not gone to film school. And we just embarked, as you do when you're new first timers and you think, how hard could it be?
Right.
And then 5 years later, you think, oh my Lord. And most documentaries take several years, actually, whether you're a first timer or not, they often tend to take a lot of time. But it was quite a process. We had good fortune by premiering at Sundance. And I just love the art of telling a story that maybe felt a little unexpected. And I think that's, now that I look back, having made several of them, or a few anyway, I think the quality they all have in common is that they're slightly unexpected, things, the story Mothers of Bedford about women, really working to become better parents, better mothers, while being incarcerated and trying to stay connected to their children. I think it's something people don't think about when they think about people in prison. Same with this story of Quilters. And certainly with Ernie and Joe about two police officers trying to learn how to deal with de-escalation in terms of mental health. So I really just fell in love with this art of telling a story and allowing somebody to walk in another person's shoes for 30 minutes or an hour and a half and be immersed in a different world that they don't know about, or they think they know about and actually don't. So it's a wonderful journey, I think, for me to make it, and hopefully for the participants to be part of, and then finally for the audience to kind of enjoy.
Were there things during your years working those other jobs, both in news and in nonprofits, that helped to inform the way that you're doing this work now, or that were good kind of training grounds for what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think, well, I've always loved documentaries, and I've watched a lot of them. And I guess I would definitely say to anyone who's embarking on making one to watch a lot of documentaries, see what's out there, see what choices people are making. And I think because I was in the nonprofit world, and I was interested in kind of stories that, maybe I felt needed to be told and might not be commercially known, kind of commercially told as frequently. So yeah, I think that's probably those kind of issues inform me in the sense of, and also learning to be a good listener. I think in whatever job you have, it is certainly proved to be a really good strength. Not that I'm not a good talker. I'm a little chatty, but I think being able to listen is really kind of where the magic is, because then you may start a project thinking what the story is, or have a timeline or a storyline that you think makes sense. And then the more you listen and observe, you think, oh, wait a minute, there's some other themes and issues here. So I think that's probably one of the biggest skills that is helpful, in this work.
And you said you found the story for A Leap of Faith with another female filmmaker. So What was that story, and how did you find it?
Yeah, it was a story actually in the New York Times about the integrated school movement in Northern Ireland. So parents who were trying to open schools for Catholic and Protestant children. And I was really fascinated. My whole family comes from Ireland, North and South. And I was a product of New York City public schools, which have been struggling with integration for many years. And so this idea that these parents, were doing it themselves, which, I went to a public school, and my parents did not, refurbish the building and hire the teachers and find the funding like those parents in Northern Ireland were doing. So that was fascinating. And they, on the face of it, all were very similar, being people who were white. But their sense of division and isolation was so powerful in that community that these parents felt it was worth the risk, which they did take, to try to open grassroots schools for Catholics and Protestant children. And so that's how it kind of started. That was the first kind of lightning bolt. So I went over and actually volunteered with an organization that was opening these schools. Before I even thought about making a film, I kind of went over and just spent some time volunteering, and really thought, oh my gosh, we need to tell the story. These parents are kind of remarkable. And when I got back to New York, somebody put Trisha Regan and I together to make this film, and it took us many years, but it was a wonderful journey, and I'm really pleased that I did it, because it started this, of course, when I was done with A Leap of Faith, I thought never again, because, they take a long time. They're incredibly difficult to fund. And, and it feels sometimes thankless, while you're trying to make it. But then at the end, you have this hopefully beautiful story that people respond to. But I just thought, oh, I don't think I can do this. And I ended up actually working for an Irish non-profit, who did wonderful work. And I had a very stable job with them. And then, the Mothers of Bedford story about a nun who was doing this program in prisons, in this specific prison in New York State, kind of fell in my lap. And once again, I had this feeling, I have got to tell the story. So there does seem to be a process where a story I kind of happen upon a story either through a friend or a newspaper or something. And I can't quite let it go. And then I go visit and I think, yes, this is something that hasn't really been told or hasn't been told well. And that's usually how I decide if I have to do it or not. And then the fun begins, which is like trying to fundraise and all that. So.
Right. So when you are fundraising, what does that entail? I mean, is that you'd need to get all the money for this up front? And what is that money paying for? And who funds these sorts of things?
Yeah, it's tricky now. It's harder because there's less funding sources. But in my case, it's usually because I tend to do stories that would kind of veer towards social issue storylines. So it's not kind of something that's going to be necessarily something that would be commissioned, maybe, so to speak. So I tend to fund mine through grants and film funding grants and other issue grants. In the case of Ernie and Joe, I kind of spread outside of film grants into mental health. There's a foundation that was very dedicated to mental health education, and they felt strongly this was a great way to be able to tell that story. So they supported the film. So usually, in the case of like Quilters, there was a terrific contributor donor who had supported a past film and just gave the project a little seed money to go out and film just for a couple of days or a week to see what was there, because you can't really apply for larger grants if you don't have any footage. And I did.
So you have to get some initial footage before
exactly
to prove right. that there is something.
Okay. Exactly. Because, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you probably could write a terrific written proposal and not have the footage, or maybe not have to have it. Now it's very competitive. And even then they would have wanted to see some footage, but now it's really mandatory because they want to get a sense of the characters, who the subjects are, your access, that kind of thing. So I went out and did a little bit of footage, and it's also great just for the filmmaker to really kind of reestablish why you're doing this. And if you have footage, it's easier to kind of understand who your subjects are going to be and which characters, are the ones who maybe are more comfortable on camera. And so I went out and did that. And then I used that sample footage then to apply for larger grants. And then I just have a very lean budget. It's only, a 3-person crew. It's myself, camera, and sound, which I would like anyway, even just not just from a financial standpoint, but I think from, the work, the actual work or the artistic piece of it, it's so much better, I think, if you can really try to be observational and like a fly on the wall, not take up a ton of space, not have a cast of thousands, because then suddenly people are focused on your presence as opposed to what you're there to see. So I always, and same with Mothers of Bedford, again, it was a prison situation. It's just easier to have less people. Same with inside a police car. Much easier to have less people. So I think any kind of these stories where you're following a storyline or kind of following the action, it's so much better to have a smaller footprint. And I just think it's also nicer for the subjects to not have this kind of zoo-like feeling with too many people there. So.
And can I ask how much money it actually costs? Like for a short, like the Quilters, which is half an hour, are we talking like millions of dollars? Like I have no concept, so I hope it's okay if I ask, like in general, how much is something like that need?
Yeah, they really range. I have to be honest, they really, really range. You could have, I've seen multi-million-dollar documentaries that are feature length, but for, and then I've seen, shorts that are anywhere from, a couple 100,000 to, $500,000 kind of thing. So a lot of it depends on like travel and access, like what the budget is. So if you're traveling down to, the Amazon with a crew and, so much of it depends on what the story is. In my case, small crew, and limited, but great access. I was very, very fortunate that the facility was very accommodating about letting me in. And then we just pretty bare bones. I mean, because we couldn't leave for the day, we were actually bringing our own lunch into the facility. So nothing, no frills for sure. But it's great if you're with a crew that really appreciates what they're doing. And I've had that in every situation where the crew really is invested, not just with their career, but also kind of emotionally care about what they're doing most of the time, which is terrific. So yeah. And so and I also incentivized to keep my budget kind of lean because I have to get grants for it. So, yeah, so it definitely ranges, I would say, from, 300,000 to, 600 or up to $1 million.
Okay.
Totally depends on the length of time and where you're shooting. So.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful to hear. So, okay. And I'm wondering about kind of next steps. So like, you get the initial footage and then you apply for these grants and hopefully are able to secure the funding that's needed. Now, when it comes to many of these Mothers of Bedford, the Quilters, and even Ernie and Joe, like, you have to get permission from the state, I guess, in order to be able to get into a penitentiary or access, police officers. So,
yes,
so do you just call up and be like, "Hey, I'm Jenifer and I'm a filmmaker and here's my idea. Can I come tomorrow?" Like, how does that work?
Well, it's funny enough, it's kind of that way. In all cases, I'm just trying to think. Mothers of Bedford, trying to get into Bedford in New York State, took quite a while. And I think just because there was a lot of administration changes. But then once they okayed it, it was kind of immediate. So it was a bit of a scramble then to kind of put together a crew to do it. In the case of San Antonio, where I shot Ernie and Joe, I contacted their press office and just said, "Could I come visit?" And then kind of talk to them about what I was going to do. And they were pretty willing. I was surprised, actually. I've had good fortune in terms of getting access approved. I think because I'm pretty straightforward and clear about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, why it matters to me. And so the same was the case with this facility in Missouri. I spent some time without my camera, which I think is really helpful. I've done that in every case.
Okay.
Because then you can just spend without the trappings of the camera and the extra people and whatever else you're dragging in. It's just you as a person there spending some time. And in the case of the Quilters, I went, I think, for 3 or 4 days and just observed, just visited, hung out like a visitor in the sewing room. And it pretty quickly was wishing I had my camera with me because there were just some beautiful conversations happening. And I thought, oh, I wish I had my camera. But I think it's more important to develop some sense of trust, who you are, why you're there. And people kind of can pick up, what your kind of methodology is or what you're hoping to achieve. And so I just had very off the cuff conversations with the guys who were there and the man, Joe Satterfield, who runs the program, the restorative justice program there in that part of the facility, which also has beautiful painters, crocheters, knitters. It's phenomenal. I happened to just choose the Quilters because I felt like I needed to zone in on one specific art or craft. But I could have easily, the other range of work was pretty unbelievable.
Wow.
So anyway, that's, I think, was helpful, was to spend a little time. I'm not kind of going in to get a quick sound bite without no context. I do think it surprises, though, like a police department or a prison or a school or wherever you're going, how often you want to come back. I do think that is something they're kind of like, what? Didn't you get it?
Right. Like, you were already here.
Yeah,
why
exactly.
are you coming back?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely this sense of, you shot for a whole week. How could you not have enough? And I guess, and then I think once they see the film, in every case, they're like, oh, okay. Because, and I was like, if I had to give an analogy, I'd say, if you meet somebody for the first time, maybe at a party or a cocktail party or something, and you have a short conversation with them, and they're lovely and they seem interesting, but you really don't know them at all because you've only talked for 10 minutes or 15 or whatever it is, as opposed to over many times where you go back and you kind of develop connections or a real sense of friendship or whatever the case may be. And it's the same for film. You have that initial reaction, but until the person the subject who is participating actually spends time, starts to unwind and kind of forget about the camera and be more themselves. And you see them in different situations and with different people, you develop, I think, much more of a sense of who they are and what's kind of driving what they're doing, and their sense of humor or their grouchiness or whatever the things are that make someone individually them, is so much easier to see if you go back many times. And in my case too, I wanted to see the quilts, being finished. So, that doesn't happen overnight. So I would kind of come back and try to revisit certain quilts. It didn't always work because timing wise, it was a little tricky sometimes to get it just right. But I wanted us to get to know certain men and also some of these quilts. So to kind of recognize them so by the time they were gone, had a sense of their process.
I want to take a minute now to talk about our sponsor, Stitch Squad. Stitch Squad is a brand new subscription box dedicated to spreading a love and knowledge of fiber crafts among the next generation of crafters. A cute, colorful, crafty unboxing experience, each monthly box highlights a different fiber craft technique with a focus on learning new skills, including crochet, cross-stitch, embroidery, hand sewing, bargello, weaving, and so much more. All the supplies you need are included to complete 2 to 3 projects, including a printed pattern book with instructions and beginner tutorials. Each box also includes a whole bundle of cute and crafty surprises that kids love, including notions and craft tools, stationery, small gifts, and an endless supply of fun, cute things. There's even an achievement badge with each box, so subscribers can track all the new skills they learn. Stitch Squad is educational because crafting builds lifelong skills. It also allows a break from screens, boosts brain power, and it fosters independence. With Stitch Squad, there's also no guesswork. The boxes are carefully curated with the best supplies, patterns, and instructions that kids need for success. So just open the box and enjoy. Stitch Squad also makes a great gift. Give the gift of creative fun and a happy surprise in the mail every single month. Stitch Squad's mission is to help busy families carve out more time for creativity. Subscribe to receive a new surprise box each and every month. Who doesn't need more happy mail days? So to get started, visit stitchsquadbox.com and use the code ALLIANCE, that's ALLIANCE, to save 20% off your first box. Thank you so much, Stitch Squad. And now back to my conversation with Jenifer. Yeah. And, I know from shooting online classes that the thing with film is it's finite. You can't add to it. It's not like writing where you can go back in and add a paragraph because this part's not clear or something like that. It's like you only have what you have. And so if you don't have enough, that's it,
Right. Exactly. And that's that kind of perfectly describes it. You do need to go back, occasionally, and it's really difficult to do. I mean, with Mothers of Bedford, one of the main characters, kind of in some ways the heart of the film, I had locked picture. We were completely done. And the color was done. The audio mix was done. And then one of the women got out of prison after 24, 25 years. And I thought, I just couldn't have this film out in the world without people seeing her outside. It felt wrong to have in the film, have her still inside. So in that case, I went back and we reshot one day as she was leaving, and her boys who had grown up 24 years without her. We're there to meet her at the gates, and the women are kind of calling out from the windows, "Goodbye, we love you. Goodbye, Mona." So that was a really heartfelt, important scene. So I went back, but in most cases, you don't do that. So exactly what to your point is you just keep filming different variations of their day and their work. And it's a little challenging in a prison because, the room doesn't change. The space doesn't change. They don't leave. You don't so in other stories, you have a sense of movement if they're going about their day, from work to home to kids, an outside kind of life is very different. So my big concern with Mothers of Bedford and with the Quilters was people feeling claustrophobic because we don't leave that space very much, except to go to their cells. But interestingly, when I did some feedback screenings with other filmmakers and editors, which you do kind of at certain points during the process to make sure you're not totally off, you're not going off the rails, that people are understanding the story and they don't have questions that haven't been answered and that kind of thing. And much to my surprise and relief, that there was a kind of a common feeling that they weren't feeling claustrophobic, that they actually didn't want to leave. In one version of the film, we see the person who runs the program for the prison, Joe, going and delivering the quilts. And interestingly enough, almost to a person, the feedback we got was, no, they didn't want to leave the space because the space felt kind of special, which I had that same feeling when I was there. It really does feel like an unusual space within that facility. It's like, and so the audience kind of didn't want us to see the films being delivered since the guys don't see that, which is really interesting, and so on the money. It was so perfect. It was, I once it was said, I thought, you know what, that's totally right. It did feel kind of, it was detouring too much from what the actual story is. So we do, in the end credits, you do see the quilts with the kids, because I think that was a nice for the audience to have that little bit of closure to say, there they are out in the world, but without a whole scene where we're doing it and leaving this, in a sense, sacred space, which these guys kind of feel like they're in. And when you're in it yourself, I wanted, the audience to feel as I did, which is this kind of very busy, nonstop. It felt to me like a beehive. Everybody was super busy on their individual piece or their individual quilt or their individual project. But they were all collaborating in a bigger way, either helping each other or kind of pinch hitting and jumping in to finish something for somebody or working on a quilt together. So it was just constant motion. And one of the men says, we have created this community within this huge prison population. And it did feel that way. It felt kind of like a family. You could tell there was real affection and concern for each other, and real pride in what they were doing. And I think that was very noticeable to me, having worked in a prison before, that these men really cared about what they were doing and felt great pride in doing the best job they could, even though they didn't get to see the actual reaction to the quilt in person. They often get letters or they get kind of stories back from who's handed them off. But even just knowing that they were doing it, really powerful, and created a real sense of purpose and a real sense of pride, which I think we all need, no matter where we are.
And just to be clear for folks who haven't seen the trailer, which we'll link to in the show notes, these men are in a restorative justice program in this prison, and they're creating quilts that then get given to children who are in the foster care system.
That's right. That's right. So, they give all the quilts away. Some go to charities, some go to veterans groups, some go to, any kind of nonprofit charitable work is eligible. But the program that really seems to have struck a chord with this group of quilters is the foster care program. And that has just started a couple of years ago, where social services kind of links with these guys, and they make quilts for a specific child to be given on their birthday. So you see it in the film. There's a list. They get a list, of the kid's initials or name and birth date. And so the men will kind of just check off, they kind of just go down in order chronologically and personalize it in some way. So usually it's either the child's name or the child's initials, favorite colors, if they can find that out, that kind of thing. And anybody who's familiar with foster care knows how rare it is for a child in that situation to have something that is just personalized, that's just theirs. I've heard many stories of kids just having their belongings in a plastic bag and they go from home to home. So the idea of having a quilt that will travel with them that is only theirs and is personalized is really meaningful for the recipient, but just as much for the men. And I think, a very large percentage of people who are incarcerated have been in the foster care system. So there are many layers to the story. And I think in some ways they're just kind of healing a little part of their own past by doing something so powerful and reframing how they're seen. They're doing something that's good. They're giving, it's making amends. It's kind of a bridge to the community outside that now may see them slightly differently because they've done something useful. And anyway, it's just, I found it very affirming to witness this work.
And what is restorative justice?
It's a really good question. And what I've learned is it means a lot of different things in different places. Some places it's very specific about making amends to your victim. In other places it's doing kind of work that is helpful to the outside, like this facility in Licking also has a garden, and all the food goes to the local food bank. They train dogs for programs, so that people who need dogs, either for seeing eye dogs or for therapy dogs. So they do a lot of training of dogs. So this idea of giving back, but it does seem to vary somewhat between state and different regions. But so this falls within restorative justice in this particular prison. And I think it is a trend, not every prison, of course, makes quilts at all, by far, very few, but there is a trend towards this idea of finding ways to be purposeful, give back, and acknowledge why you're there, what happened, what you did, and try to move forward in a way that's helpful to the wider community. And that's definitely happening with these men for sure. And I think it's happening in a lot of places. So I think it's an excellent trend in terms of, moving forward.
And you talked a little bit about sort of casting characters. And obviously this is not a fictional, movie where you're literally, having a casting call and actors are coming to try out for parts, but you are telling a narrative and you do have to sort of hone in on specific characters, even though they're
Right.
real life characters, in order to sort of tell the story through their individual experiences. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process of doing that. You said you were there for a few days without the cameras and then you're there with the cameras, but it's almost like you have to audition different characters and decide on, okay, it's going to be about this man and not about that man and that man.
No, that's very, very true. And there's a lot of different factors. One is just the amount of time and space. You just can't cover too many people. It's too confusing, for the person watching to keep track of too many characters. So, generally especially with a short, you don't want to have too many guys. So that's one thing. The other thing is some people are just so much more comfortable on camera. So there's a lot of self-selection. And I found this in Mothers of Bedford as well. And in Quilters, where certain men just either they're very eloquent or they're comfortable on camera or they're just very much themselves and kind of come to life, so to speak. And sometimes that isn't clear until you're in the edit room and you come back and watch the footage. And that happened actually with the Irish film. The principal in that project, I didn't necessarily see initially as a main subject, a main character. But once we got back and started watching the footage back in New York, she just so came to life. And she ended up being the kind of thread for all the different families that we were visiting. So it's really interesting. Or somebody who, when you're there, you think, oh, they're so critical to the story. I'm going to do this for this X, Y, and Z reason. And then you get back, and for some reason, and sometimes it's intangible, you can't quite put your finger on what it is, but they're just not kind of making it the point, or they're not comfortable on camera, or it's just hard. But a lot of it is just, you can't have too many people. And you also don't want them to all have the same story. So, in the case of the Quilters, one of the people I met who were filming was a young man who had not been there very long and was hoping to be released fairly soon. So a shorter sentence he was hoping, and much younger, and had never sewed. And most of the guys in the sewing room are older. And so it was nice to have that contrast. So for me, it was really great to at least include somebody who was younger, had a slightly different story. They tend to be older, which is interesting because prisons are aging. And there's a huge issue with, inmates or prisoners who have long sentences, are really becoming elderly. And, some prisons are putting in hospice, they're putting in, long-term care kind of situations. So, which, you could beg the question, does that make sense after a certain point if they're not, a danger? So yeah. And, also like chill is one of the subjects in the Quilters, and he just spoke beautifully about why he quilted. And he was different than some of the other quilters because he doesn't like patterns. He doesn't like to follow a pattern, but he loves to make beautiful quilts. He loves to incorporate butterflies in his work. He talked a lot about his mother and his connection to his mother. So he really kind of was somebody I wanted to make sure to feature. Ricky, one of the men there who has a life sentence and has been in prison for decades and decades, is kind of the Pied Piper of the group. He trains most everybody. He teaches anyone who is willing to sew. He repairs all the sewing machines. He's just an Energizer bunny. He just doesn't stop. And so he really, in some ways, is the kind of the beating heart of the room, because he's just so determined. And he has really found it's transformed his existence, because I think he had a lot of guilt, felt terrible for his family about the fact that he's been gone so long. And this is a way to make amends and to feel like he's doing something good in the world. So, and he was very clear about that. And, several of the guys in the film are doing life sentences. And I really was very moved by this idea that even though there's a very good chance you're not going home and you're not leaving, it's still vital to try to have some sense of purpose. And so there were a couple of men who have life sentences who are in the film. And I really thought that was an important theme. So some of it is on theme. Some of it is on just background and story. And then it's how many people you can include. So you don't actually make the full decision until you're editing. Then it's clear who really has to stay and who you might have to lose in terms of timing. It's mainly just a matter of how much time you have. So in the case of this being a short, really had to trim it down and didn't get to use as much as I would have liked, which is usually the case. But I feel like the message and the themes that I was trying to convey still really come through, even though it's a short 30-minute as opposed to, in the case of Ernie and Joe was like 85 minutes, which is a longer story to tell.
And we meet them as quilters instead of meeting them as people who have committed crimes. Like we don't start off by delving into what are their crimes, or I'm not even sure that is necessarily fleshed out at all. It really focuses on the men as people who make quilts, and we at home, many of us watching, are also people who make quilts.
Exactly. And I love, love, love when you can do that in a film. Like, with Mothers of Bedford, there are people at home who are parents or mothers. So there were things that the women were saying they could really relate to. Same, I'm hoping, for the Quilters, because there's what I've learned. I wish now I was a quilter, and I plan to try to learn because I really feel like I'm missing out. So many quilters have already reached out even though the film's not done, just to kind of check in, see when it's going to be done. And so my hope is that, yes, they will see kind of all the good things that are coming from this for these men, just even internally. Just this, one of the men talks about when he's doing this, meaning quilting, he's not here, meaning prison. So this idea that it is kind of, it transcends where you are. It brings you into kind of a different space when you're so focused on creating something beautiful. So I really, from the minute, that's one thing I was very sure of when I started this film, was I wasn't going to focus on the crime, because I thought that's not what this film is about. Like there's plenty of films out there that you can find about true crime or why people are in prison or should they be there. But that wasn't what I really wanted this film to be, which is, what are these guys? What have they chosen to do with the time they have? And then this idea that they are now in love with this craft, this act of art, making it, choosing the fabric, what they're going to do, what the design is, and how important it is to them, and kind of life fulfilling it is, even though they may not be ever leaving those cinder block walls. And I'm hoping, any person who enjoys arts, especially quilters, will really kind of connect with the film. And there's so many quilters out there, I realize now. And it was funny when the men asked me, one of them said, so you quilt? I was kind of embarrassed. I was like, actually, I don't, but I should, I will. And they were great. They kind of launched into a pep talk about, it's not that hard. It's like, if you stick with the basics and the straight lines and they kind of gave me this talk about at least trying. And it was a great takeaway for me, because I thought, why don't I try? So it's a new world for me, which I loved spending time around. And each quilt, of course, is different, and everybody puts their own spin on it. And, so yeah, my hope is that people watching will really connect, especially the quilters.
And am I right that your voice isn't on film?
No, it is.
Okay.
It never is. Although I think there's one place where you might hear me kind of, we actually did have a question in there. We ended up taking it when we were editing it. But I think there's one moment where you may hear me respond. One of the men says, "Oh, can I show you this quilt?" And I say, "Oh, I'd love to," or something. Yeah, you can faintly hear me. But otherwise, no, I really prefer to have them tell the entire story. So you don't hear my questions normally.
And how do you know when you're done? I mean, I feel like that's a hard
question.
When you're working on anything creative, it can be hard to know when you're done.
That is such a great question. And I think it's particularly true with this kind of work, with documentaries, because, their story's going to keep going on. So it is really hard to know when to stop, because you don't want to shoot too little and not kind of get some nuance that you would have missed if you had just hung around long enough. In the case of Mothers of Bedford, I wanted to make sure that we saw somebody leave. And I did, but then Mona got out too. But, so part of it is you want to stay long enough for something to happen that you think might happen, or just to get to know the subjects better. In this case, because I knew it was a short and had a smaller budget, I knew I wasn't going to be kind of going back for, many years, which like I have done in other film projects. But, that's such a good question, because it is a little tricky. I was trying to go back because, I wanted to visit each man's cell, and, Ricky got sick with a terrible stomach bug while I was there on the day that I was supposed to film his interview in the cell. And I kept thinking, I'll go back because I have the other guy, so I really need him. And then I realized, you know what? Everything he needs, everything that he wants to say that is important, I think, and he was clear was important. He says, I don't really, like, what really am I going to get by going back, and that of course too, you're thinking about the budget and all that. Should I go back? And I ended up realizing I didn't really have to be in all their cells, because I was focusing on three or four men are the kind of main focus. So I had to let that go and thought, wait a minute, I don't have to be in each one. So Ricky says tons of amazing things in different places, and I'll just leave it at that. So I ended up, and also when you realize that the footage is very good, it's different if you go home and you look at the footage. And I don't know if this would translate to quilting, but if you look at it and it's like the design, just in our case, the structure of the film or something, if you feel like it's just not working, or you just don't have enough footage that really conveys some of what you think the story is that you saw, but it's not reflected in the footage, then you definitely want to go back. But once we sat with it, we thought, okay, no, just given it's a short, I think we have what we need. And so then you kind of give yourself permission to stop. But it is really tricky. It's an excellent question, because it really, you always think, oh, was something amazing going to happen around the corner, But
Yeah,
I felt,
absolutely.
Yeah.
The editing process, it sounds like, is as long, if not longer, than the filming process.
Definitely. Yeah. Yes, without a doubt. And I would say it's my favorite, aside from the initial filming, and meeting the subjects and kind of figuring out what that story is. It's probably my favorite part of the process, because, it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and you have about 500 extra pieces and the picture on the box is in your head. So you kind of know what you're trying to do. And it changes slightly based on what footage you have. And things that you have to let go that are great, but they just don't move the story along, things like that. So it's a very critical piece of it. My editor, Toby Shimon, is just incredibly gifted. And we've been really fortunate to work together on all my projects, which is just a great blessing. And she's turned into a great friend as well. And it's terrific because she's not there with me when I'm filming. She can maybe see things or ask questions or question, choices that I might not be too attached to certain footage or too attached to a certain subject. And she can see it in a slightly different way. So yeah, it is really important, and it takes a long time, because then you have to do music and you have to figure out sound, and it's very involved, but it's critical. And I think it's usually better if you don't edit yourself, because you can get just too attached to certain storylines that don't necessarily make the bigger story move forward.
Right. You have to kill your darlings, as they say.
Exactly.
That's really hard to do without an editor, for sure. And so I'm wondering how people can see not just the Quilters, because we definitely want to see that one, but how people can see each of the different films that you've worked on.
Oh, okay. What I can do, maybe for your program notes, I could give you a link.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
Ernie and Joe is on HBO. So if you have HBO, that's really easy.
Great.
And the other ones I can send you some info on, which is great.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great. And I was going to say, in the Quilters, when is the Quilters ready and how can we see that one? Because I feel like it's a short. I'm not sure where those get published.
Well, tell me about it. That's another tricky thing. Like, we talked about funding and then shooting and then editing, and then like trying to find a home is really a challenge these days. Especially with shorts, which, I had been warned. This is my first short. All my other projects were featured. So this, is definitely tricky to find at home, but film festivals are great. And with all my films, I try to do like an outreach community piece too down the road. So I'm kind of trying to get some advice on good ways to reach quilters after it's had its initial life. But the festivals, we're going to be in Indianapolis in July. We're going to be in Middlebury, Vermont in August. And I'm talking to people about having a television air date. So I will definitely keep you posted on where people can find the Quilters. And I'm excited because, like I said, I'm realizing there's such an amazing community of quilters in this country. So I'm excited for them to find the film.
Yeah, maybe it can be something that airs at QuiltCon or at H&H Americas. I'll talk to you about that afterwards. But I feel like I have some other possibilities of places where lots of quilters gather, and would love to see this film. So that's really exciting. So I
Yeah.
want to make sure we get to your recommendation list because you've got some good ones. So you said that your favorite book is The Color of Water. I have not read this book, so it's a good recommendation.
Yeah, I love this book. I actually always keep an extra copy in my house in case I want to just lend it to someone. I mean, I give it to someone. And it's by James McBride, who actually has a good book out now too. I'm forgetting that.
Yeah, it's
Grocery.
in the grocery
Yes,
store. Yeah.
exactly. And this was an earlier book he did, and it's kind of a memoir about growing up with his parents. And he is from an interracial background, a Jewish tradition and African American tradition. And I just think it's the loveliest book in terms of family and community. And I never tire of it. I never tire of recommending it. So
All right, that's a good one. Yeah.
yeah,
That's good summer read for folks. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's not that long. It's not one of these, 500 pages. You think, oh, I can't, it's not that long. And it's, I think the subtext of the title, Color of Water, I think it's a Black man's tribute to his white mother. And it just, so it tackles so many issues that we're all hearing about all the time about, and it does it beautifully. And, anyway, I think it's just a great little snapshot of his family. So.
And then your favorite pastime with friends is going to live theater and films together.
Yes. I never tire of the only thing stops me is my budget with because Broadway's gotten so expensive now. I'm taking my niece to see the Alicia Keys musical on Sunday. So I don't limit myself to musical or drama, but I probably lean a little bit more towards drama, but I like it all. I just think it's so it just really talk about feeding the soul, live music, live theater. But something about live theater I just adore because the writing has to be good, the acting has to be good, to really pull it off is just a treat. And I feel that way about good films as well. So I'm actually planning to see one in a couple of days. So it's nice. I'm so happy that movie theaters, I think, are coming back. I'm not sure. I hope they're coming back. I'm single-handedly trying to keep my local art house cinema open because I just don't want us to all be sitting at home watching films on our laptops alone. Like, even though you don't talk during the movie, you chit chat a whole lot after on the way out, talk about what you liked, what you didn't, was it scary, was it not? And that's just so important to have this connection, to have things to, bring us together. And so I feel that way about the arts in general, but especially film and theater are like my favorites. So.
And then the last one is wandering New York City, where you grew up.
Oh yeah, I could do that forever. I mean, I do think as I get older, it is a little more tiring because it is seriously the city that never sleeps. But I just really loved growing up there, and I still will always think of myself as a New Yorker. And I really always encourage people to go outside of Midtown, go take the number 7 to Flushing and walk around and get 5,000 different kinds of Asian food and go to a baseball game and go to the botanical gardens in the Bronx, go outside Midtown. And I just do not tire of that. And fortunately, my brother, my only sibling, my brother who I'm extremely close to, lives in the city with his family. So I have great excuses to get down there a lot. And work, of course, brings me to the city. So it's great. And I kind of feel like that about any new place I've never been to. I love just exploring a new city. I went to Portland, Maine for the first time a couple of weeks ago. It was just great to just kind of hunt around and find a great coffee place, a great bookstore, I always feel invigorated when I do that. And the great thing about New York is it's so much going on that you can just do a little corner of the city and you haven't even scratched the surface, and it's, anyway, so those are things that I love to do.
Well, Jenifer, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, thanks, Abby. It's really been a treat to talk to you. I really, really appreciate it.
And you've been listening to the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today's episode was brought to you by Stitch Squad. Stitch Squad is a monthly stitching box for crafty kids ages 9 to 14. Subscribe to receive a new surprise box each month, featuring a range of fibercraft techniques, fun projects to make, cute notions, and surprise goodies. Life is busy, and we want to make it easier for families and kids to enjoy more creative downtime. A subscription makes an amazing holiday gift for a kid in your life. To subscribe, visit StitchSquadBox.com and use the code ALLIANCE for 20% off your first box. Thank you so much, Stitch Squad. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals. When you become a member of Craft Industry Alliance, you get in-depth coverage of craft industry news, the opportunity to connect with fellow professionals for advice and support, and access to an educational library filled with ideas, tools, and resources to help you as you build your business. Join us at craftindustryalliance.org. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.